Far beyond the edge of the sun's light, in the cold dark between stars, a fleet of alien ships moved slowly through space. These were not warriors. They were haulers, junk movers, garbage collectors of the galaxy. Their job was simple. Take old, broken, useless machines and dump them somewhere far away, where nobody important would ever find them. The fleet belonged to a species called the Vrenthil. They were tall, thin, gray-skinned beings with large black eyes and long fingers. They were not fighters. They were workers, paid by a much bigger power called the Galactic Concord, to clean up old junk. The Concord was the group that ruled most of the known galaxy. It had rules for everything. One of the biggest rules was this: old warships that were too dangerous or too expensive to keep had to be destroyed, or dumped somewhere safe. But destroying a warship costs money. Dumping it somewhere safe costs nothing, if you pick the right place. The ship they carried this time was called the Thresh Cutter. It was once a mighty war machine, built 500 years ago by a species that no longer existed. The species had died out in a war, but their ship survived, passed from empire to empire, used and used again, until its systems were old, its weapons half broken, and its computer core so outdated that no modern species wanted to fix it. It was too expensive to repair, and too dangerous to leave floating in Concord space. The rules said it must be disposed of. The captain of the Vrenthil hauler fleet was named Doskol. He was tired. He had been doing this job for 30 years. He looked at his screen, where a small blue-green planet appeared, spinning quietly at the edge of a minor star system. "That one," Doskol said, pointing with one long finger. "Third planet. No Concord flag. No registered species contact. Primitive world." His assistant, a smaller Vrenthil named Erie, checked the data. "Confirmed, Captain. The species there is called humans. Level 0 civilization. They have not even left their own star system yet. No weapons that could reach orbit with any real force. No one will ever know we left it here." Doskol nodded slowly. "Good. Drop the ship in high orbit around their moon. Let it drift. If it falls, it falls. Not our problem anymore. Once it leaves our tow line, our job is done, and the Concord inspectors will mark this case as closed." It was not cruelty. It was not even carelessness. It was simply what garbage collectors did with garbage. They found an empty corner of space and left the mess there. To the Vrenthil, Earth was not a home to billions of living, thinking, feeling people. It was an empty corner, a place with no one who mattered. They were wrong. On Earth, in a quiet observatory built into the side of a mountain in Chile, a young astronomer named Elena Vasquez was working the night shift. She was tired, drinking her third cup of coffee, checking the sky survey data that had come in from the telescope. Most nights were boring. Stars did not move. Nothing exciting happened. Then something did. A large object appeared in her data, moving in a way that made no sense. It was not a comet. It was not an asteroid. Comets and asteroids followed the laws of physics, curving smoothly under gravity. This object changed direction, twice, in the space of an hour. Elena sat up straight. She rubbed her eyes and looked again. The object was still there, and it was getting closer to the moon. "That's not possible," she whispered to herself. She called her supervisor. Within an hour, 3 more observatories around the world had picked up the same object. By morning, half the world's astronomers were staring at the same strange shape drifting into orbit around the moon. It was enormous, nearly 4 kilometers long, made of some dark metal that barely reflected light. It had no engine glow, no heat signature that matched anything natural. It was not a rock, it was a machine. Within 2 days, every space agency on Earth had turned its instruments toward the object. NASA, the European Space Agency, Roscosmos, the China National Space Administration, India's ISRO, all of them saw the same thing: a massive, ancient, silent structure, sitting quietly in orbit around the moon, doing nothing at all. The world's governments panicked, quietly at first, then loudly. Was it a weapon? Was it about to attack? Military leaders in every major country were woken up in the middle of the night. Emergency meetings were called. Nobody had any real answers, because nobody had ever faced anything like this before. In a small office in Washington, D.C., a woman named Dr. Sarah Chen sat in front of 6 screens, each one showing a different feed from a different telescope, all pointed at the same object. She was the head of a small research group inside the Department of Defense, a group most people had never heard of, one that studied unexplained aerial and space phenomena. For years, her job had been mostly boring: weather balloons, satellite glitches, strange lights that turned out to be nothing. This was not nothing. "Talk to me," said General Marcus Webb, walking into the room with 3 other officials behind him. "What is that thing?" Sarah pulled up a full image on the main screen. The object looked like a long, jagged blade, wrapped in strange curved armor plates, with rows of what might be weapon ports along its sides, dark and silent. "We don't know what it is," Sarah admitted, "but we know what it looks like. It looks like a warship." The room went quiet. "Is it active?" Webb asked. "No power signature we can detect, no communication signals, no movement other than its natural orbit. It's just sitting there, like it was left behind." "Left behind by who?" Sarah looked at him. "That's the question, isn't it?" Over the following weeks, the world tried to make sense of what had happened. Some people were terrified, sure this was the beginning of an invasion. Others were excited, hopeful that this meant humanity was not alone, and that maybe, just maybe, this was a gift. News channels argued about it every single day. Governments spent enormous amounts of money launching probes to get a closer look, sending small robotic spacecraft to photograph the object from every angle. The probes revealed more strange details. The ship, if that's what it was, had damage across its hull, burn marks, broken sections, missing armor plates. It looked less like a weapon aimed at Earth, and more like an old machine, tired and broken, drifting through space, until gravity finally caught it. Then, 3 months after it first appeared, something changed. A small section of the ship's hull, near the rear, cracked open. Not an explosion, not an attack, just a slow mechanical failure, as if a piece finally gave up after being ignored for too long. Gas vented into space, metal groaned, and then, silence again. That was the final proof the world needed. Whatever this was, it was not being controlled by anyone. It was dead, abandoned, a wreck. The United Nations called an emergency session. Every country wanted to know the same thing. What do we do with an alien warship parked around our moon? Some countries wanted to destroy it immediately, afraid of hidden weapons or diseases. Others wanted to claim it for themselves, dreaming of the technology inside. Smaller nations worried they would be left out entirely, that the powerful countries would take the prize and leave everyone else behind. After weeks of arguing, a plan was agreed upon, mostly because no single country trusted any other country enough to act alone. A new organization was created, called the Global Space Initiative, or GSI. It would be made up of scientists, engineers, and military officers from every major nation, working together, for the first time in history, on a single project. Their job: study the ship, understand it, and decide, together, what humanity's next move should be. Dr. Sarah Chen was appointed as one of the lead coordinators. Elena Vasquez, the young astronomer who first spotted the object, was recruited as well, thrilled and terrified to be part of something so much bigger than herself. Building a base near the object was not simple. Nations pooled their rockets, their money, and their best engineers. Within a year, a small space station, built specifically to support the mission, was placed close to the drifting warship. Astronauts and robots began the slow, careful work of exploring the wreck from the outside, then, eventually, going inside. What they found shocked everyone. The inside of the ship was massive, far larger than it looked from outside, with hallways big enough to fit vehicles, rooms filled with strange equipment, and systems that dwarfed anything humanity had ever built. Most of it was dead, powered down, filled with dust and debris from decades, maybe centuries, of neglect. But some systems still had power, faint, weak, but present. Emergency backup cores, built to last far longer than anything human-made. The first team to go deep inside the ship included an engineer named James Okafor, a soft-spoken man from Nigeria, who had spent his whole career working on satellite propulsion systems. He was the one who found the ship's central computer core, buried deep in the heart of the vessel, still faintly glowing with a dim blue light. He stood in front of it for a long moment, his flashlight beam catching the strange alien symbols etched into the metal casing. "This thing," he said quietly into his radio, "might still be alive." Back on Earth, Sarah Chen heard those words and felt a chill run down her spine. Not from fear, from something else. Something like hope, mixed with danger, mixed with the feeling that the entire world was standing at the edge of something enormous. Nobody knew it yet, but the Vrenthil garbage haulers, so many light years away, had made a terrible mistake. They had looked at Earth and seen nothing but an empty corner of space to dump their trash. They had not counted on human curiosity. They had not counted on human stubbornness, and they certainly had not counted on what humans could do once they got their hands on something powerful enough to fight back with. The obsolete warship, broken and forgotten by the galaxy that built it, was about to get a second chance, and so was humanity. The first spark of that second chance came a few weeks later, when James Okafor's team managed to restore a tiny amount of power to one small section of the ship's computer system. A single screen flickered to life, filled with symbols nobody could read. It was the first message from a civilization far greater than their own, and it was the beginning of everything that followed. The single glowing screen inside the alien ship became the most important object on Earth. Every government wanted access to it. Every scientist wanted to study it. For the first time in human history, world leaders who normally argued over borders and trade agreed on one thing. This discovery was too big for any single nation to control alone. James Okafor's small team worked around the clock, restoring more power to the ship's ancient systems, section by section. It was slow, careful work. One wrong move, one overloaded circuit, could destroy something irreplaceable. Sarah Chen flew out personally to oversee the operation, along with a growing team of engineers, linguists, and computer scientists from a dozen countries. The breakthrough came from an unlikely source. A young computer scientist from South Korea named Min-jun Park had spent years working on machine translation and artificial intelligence before joining the GSI project. When the team finally managed to extract a working copy of the ship's language data, it was Min-jun who built the first program capable of translating the alien symbols into something humans could understand. It took him 4 months of non-stop work. He barely slept. He barely ate. But one night, sitting alone in his lab with 3 cups of cold coffee beside him, his screen flashed with the first fully translated sentence pulled from the ship's ancient logs. Warning, hull integrity. At 34%, weapon systems offline, requesting maintenance, no response from command. Min-jun stared at the words for a long time before calling Sarah Chen at 3 in the morning. "We can read it," he said, his voice shaking. "We can actually read it." Over the following weeks, the translated data revealed the true story of the ship. It was called Thresh-Cutter, and it had been built by a species called the Kalen, who had gone extinct nearly 200 years earlier during a massive interstellar war. After their extinction, the ship had passed between different galactic factions, traded, sold, and used in smaller conflicts, its systems patched and repaired just enough to keep functioning, but never properly maintained. The logs told a sad story of neglect. The last recorded crew had abandoned it decades ago, when a newer, cheaper alternative became available. Since then, it had been kept in storage, then finally handed over to a junk removal company, the Vrenthil, who were paid simply to make it disappear. The most shocking revelation came when the team accessed the ship's specifications. Even broken, even old, even stripped of its best weapons and equipment, the Thresh-Cutter was more advanced than anything humanity had ever built. Its hull was made of a metal alloy humans could not replicate. Its remaining systems used power sources far beyond human technology, converting matter into energy at levels that made human nuclear reactors look like campfires. Even the emergency lighting system in the hallways used technology decades ahead of Earth's best labs. "This ship," Sarah Chen said during a briefing with world leaders, speaking through a video call that connected offices in Washington, Beijing, Brussels, Moscow, and New Delhi at once, was considered obsolete garbage by whoever built it, and it is still more advanced than everything humanity has ever created, combined. There was a long silence on the call. "What does that tell us?" asked the Chinese representative, "about the rest of the galaxy?" Nobody had an answer, but everybody understood the same frightening truth. If this broken, unwanted, second-hand warship was beyond human capability, then the civilizations who built and used it, and the ones who threw it away like trash must be far more powerful than anyone had imagined. Not everyone on Earth reacted with careful curiosity. As news of the ship's true nature spread beyond the closed circle of scientists and officials, leaked reports and rumors began to spread across the internet. Some people were afraid, believing this was proof of an incoming invasion. Others were angry, believing their own governments were hiding the full truth, which, in some ways, they were. Protests broke out in several major cities, some demanding the ship be destroyed immediately, others demanding it be shared equally among all nations, instead of being controlled by a small group of powerful countries. Inside the halls of government, arguments grew heated as well. Some military leaders pushed hard to strip the ship for weapons technology as quickly as possible, worried that whoever built it might return to reclaim it, or worse, that hostile forces might arrive first. Others, including Sarah Chen, argued for a slower, more careful approach. If we rush this, she said during one tense meeting in Washington, we could destroy technology we don't understand, or trigger some kind of defense system we don't know exists. We need to study this properly. Rushing could get people killed. General Webb, sitting across the table, was not convinced. And if we wait too long, and whoever owns this ship decides to come collect it, or comes looking for the world dumb enough to accept alien garbage without preparing itself, we need a plan for defense, not just curiosity. In the end, a compromise was reached. Research would continue carefully, but a separate military division would be created to study and prepare defensive strategies, in case Earth ever needed to protect itself. James Okafor was placed in charge of the technical restoration team, while a newly formed division called Earth Defense Command, led by General Webb, began training soldiers and engineers for a future none of them could fully imagine. 6 months after the first successful translation, the team achieved their biggest breakthrough yet. Deep inside the ship's core systems, they discovered something unexpected, a dormant artificial intelligence, built to manage the ship's basic functions. It had been running in the lowest possible power mode for years, barely alive, waiting for enough energy to reactivate. James Okafor's team spent weeks carefully building a small, isolated power source, testing it repeatedly, before finally connecting it to the AI core. Sarah Chen insisted on being present when they activated it, along with Minjun Park and a small security team, just in case something went wrong. The moment came on a quiet morning inside the ship's main control room. James pressed the final connection into place. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, lights flickered along the walls, one by one, illuminating the room in a dim blue glow. A voice spoke, mechanical and strange, translated instantly through Minjun's software into English, through a small speaker device. System reactivation complete. Identify yourselves. Everyone in the room froze. Sarah Chen stepped forward carefully. We are humans, she said slowly, unsure if the AI could even understand normal speech patterns. This is our planet. We found your ship. We are trying to understand it. There was a pause, long enough that Sarah began to wonder if the connection had failed. Query. Current affiliation. Unknown species. Humans with Galactic Concord Registry. We don't know what that is, Sarah admitted honestly. Analysis. Species unregistered. Classification. Pre-contact civilization. This vessel was scheduled for disposal. Location selected, due to low strategic value and absence of protected species status. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Sarah felt her face grow hot with anger, even though she knew the AI was simply stating facts, not trying to insult anyone. They dumped it here, Minjun said quietly, because they thought nobody here mattered. The AI continued, its mechanical voice utterly indifferent to the emotional weight of its words. Correct. This system was designated as unclaimed, unprotected territory. Disposal of obsolete material in such zones is standard practice under Galactic Concord regulations. Sarah exchanged a look with James and Minjun. The anger in the room was obvious, but underneath it, something else was building. A kind of stubborn determination that had carried humanity through every hard moment in its history. This ship, Sarah said slowly. It's ours now. We found it. We're keeping it. Can you help us repair it? The AI processed the question for several seconds. Analysis. Hull integrity, 31% and declining. Weapon systems, 12% functional. Propulsion systems offline. Full restoration requires materials and technology beyond current human capability, based on initial scans of this facility. Then we'll build that capability, James said firmly, surprising even himself with the confidence in his voice. Whatever it takes. Query: purpose of restoration? Sarah thought about the question carefully before answering. She thought about the fear in the streets, the arguments in government meetings, the strange mix of hope and danger that had filled the world since this ship arrived. She thought about a galaxy full of beings who saw her entire planet as nothing more than an empty dumping ground. To show them, she said finally, that they made a mistake. Word of the AI's activation spread quickly through the highest levels of world governments, though it was kept carefully hidden from the public for the time being. The revelation that Earth had been deliberately chosen as a dumping ground, precisely because humanity was considered worthless and unprotected, changed the tone of every conversation about the ship. Fear did not disappear. If anything, it grew, as people began to understand that beyond Earth's sky existed a vast, organized galaxy, filled with powerful civilizations who had never even bothered to say hello. But alongside the fear grew something else entirely, something that had driven human beings throughout their entire history, through every war, every disaster, every impossible challenge they had ever faced. Determination. Within the GSI headquarters, a new goal quietly took shape, one that was never officially written down in any document, but understood by everyone involved. They were no longer just studying alien wreckage out of curiosity. They were going to fix it, rebuild it, make it stronger than anyone in the galaxy could imagine. And one day, if the beings who threw this ship away like garbage ever came looking for it, or came looking for Earth, they would find something very different waiting for them. The obsolete warship, dumped by careless strangers who never once considered that the small blue planet below might fight back, had found a new crew. They were not soldiers born to war, or engineers born to space. They were simply humans, stubborn and clever, who had just learned they were considered worthless by an entire galaxy. And humans, throughout their history, had never responded well to being underestimated. 2 years passed since the Thresh Cutter. Sarah Chen and her team. In that time, the ship stopped being a mystery and became a project, the largest and most expensive project in human history. Every major nation contributed money, materials, and their best minds. Factories that once built cars and airplanes were converted to build parts for the ship instead, guided by designs the AI, now nicknamed Cutter by the engineering team, helped translate into something humans could actually manufacture. Progress was slow at first. The materials needed to repair the ship's hull did not exist naturally on Earth. Cutter explained that the original alloy required elements mined from asteroids and processed using technology humanity did not have. So humanity built that technology instead. Robotic mining ships, based on early alien blueprints combined with human innovation, were sent to the asteroid belt for the first time in history. It took over a year to bring back enough raw material to begin real hull repairs. James Okafor, once a quiet satellite engineer, had become one of the most important people on the planet, though he rarely appeared in public and preferred it that way. He spent most of his time aboard the ship itself, now permanently docked at a growing space station built specifically to support the restoration project. The station, named Ascension Station by the engineers who built it, had grown into a small city in orbit, home to thousands of scientists, engineers, and soldiers from every corner of Earth. Minjun Park's translation software had improved dramatically, allowing smoother communication with Cutter. Over time, the AI's responses became less rigid, almost as if it were adjusting itself to better work with its new human operators. Some of the engineers even joked that Cutter was developing a personality, though Cutter itself denied this whenever asked. "I do not possess personality traits," Cutter said flatly one afternoon, after Minjun teased it about seeming annoyed by a maintenance delay. "I simply process information efficiently." "Sure you do, buddy," Minjun muttered, grinning at his screen. Slowly, piece by piece, the ship came back to life. Weapon systems that had been dead for decades were repaired, using a mix of alien technology and human engineering creativity. The engineers discovered something interesting during this process. While human technology could not match the raw power of Concord-built systems, human engineers were remarkably good at finding clever, unconventional solutions to problems. Where the original Kalen engineers had used massive, expensive systems to solve a problem, human engineers sometimes found smaller, cheaper, more efficient ways to achieve similar results, simply because they were used to working with limited resources. Cutter noted this pattern with what almost seemed like surprise. Human engineering solutions are frequently unorthodox but effective. This species adapts quickly to resource limitations. We've had a lot of practice, James replied simply. Not everything about those 2 years was focused on peaceful repair work. General Webb's Earth Defense Command grew rapidly, training soldiers, pilots, and engineers for a future none of them could fully predict. Cutter provided what information it could about the wider galaxy, though its knowledge was limited and outdated, having been isolated from galactic networks for years before its disposal. What Cutter did share was concerning. The galaxy was governed loosely by the Galactic Concord, an alliance of powerful species that maintained order across thousands of star systems. Membership in the Concord came with protections, but also strict rules and heavy costs. Unregistered systems, like Earth's, existed outside those protections entirely. They were, according to Concord law, considered open territory, free for any stronger species to claim, exploit, or ignore as they saw fit. This meant Earth was, technically, defenseless under galactic law. Nothing stopped a hostile species from arriving and taking whatever they wanted. The only reason Earth had survived this long without contact was simple bad luck for humanity, and good luck at the same time. The systems around Earth were considered too far from major trade routes to be worth much attention. Nobody powerful had bothered to visit, because nobody powerful had a reason to. That was about to change. Cutter's old identification beacon, the signal it once used to communicate with Concord shipping networks, had been silent since its power core died decades ago. But when James Okafor's team restored partial power to the ship's systems, they had also unknowingly reactivated a small piece of that beacon, sending out a faint, automatic signal confirming the ship's location and status. It was meant to alert disposal companies that a decommissioned vessel had reached its final resting place. Nobody on Earth realized the signal existed, let alone that it was broadcasting. Somewhere, many light years away, a small scavenger fleet, unrelated to the Vrenthil who dumped the ship originally, picked up that signal. Scavengers like these traveled the edges of Concord space, searching for exactly this kind of opportunity. Unclaimed, unregistered warships, sitting unprotected in low-priority systems. To them, the Thresh Cutter. His beacon was not garbage, it was an invitation. The scavenger fleet arrived 18 months after the beacon first activated, entering Earth's solar system without warning. 3 ships, each smaller than the Thresh Cutter, but still far larger than anything humanity had ever built, appeared just beyond the orbit of Mars, moving steadily toward Earth. Cutter detected them first. Its sensors, though limited, still far superior to anything humans possessed. The alert reached Sarah Chen's desk within minutes. Unknown vessels, she read aloud from the report, her stomach tightening. 3 ships, approaching from the outer system, ETA to Earth orbit, 6 days. The news spread through the highest levels of every government within hours. Panic threatened to take hold, but the years of preparation under General Webb's command meant Earth was not entirely unprepared, even if it was still hopelessly outmatched. Cutter analyzed what little sensor data it could gather about the approaching ships. Vessel configuration consistent with scavenger-class raiders, low military value individually, but dangerous in groups. Likely here to claim this vessel as salvage. Can we fight them? General Webb asked, standing in the ship's control room alongside Sarah and James. Current weapon systems operational, at approximately 40% capacity, Cutter reported. Insufficient for direct confrontation against 3 hostile vessels. Recommend alternative strategy. What alternative? Webb pressed. Cutter paused, an unusually long pause for the AI. Uncertain. This situation exceeds my original programming parameters. I was designed for combat support, not strategic planning against superior forces with limited resources. James Okafor, quiet for most of the conversation, finally spoke up. Then let humans handle the strategy part. That's what we're good at. Over the following 6 days, Earth Defense Command worked with the ship's restoration team to prepare a plan. It was not an easy plan, and it relied heavily on surprise and misdirection rather than raw power. since raw power was something Earth simply did not have. James Okafor proposed using the ship's partially repaired weapon systems, combined with a fleet of smaller human-built defense satellites launched over the previous year, to create the illusion of a much stronger defense than actually existed. If they think this ship is fully operational and dangerous, James explained during a tense planning meeting, they might decide the risk isn't worth it. Scavengers don't want a real fight. They want an easy target. Sarah nodded slowly, so we make sure we don't look easy. When the 3 scavenger ships finally arrived at the edge of Earth's orbit, they were met not by silence, but by a coordinated response. Human satellites, positioned strategically around the planet and around the thresh cutter itself, activated in unison, creating a dense field of sensor noise and false energy readings designed by Cutter's calculations to mimic a much larger defensive network than truly existed. At the same time, the thresh cutter itself powered up every system James Okafor's team had managed to restore, lighting up the ship with visible energy signatures far beyond its true combat readiness. Weapon ports that were only partially functional glowed with power, giving the appearance of a fully armed warship rather than a barely repaired wreck. The scavenger fleet slowed its approach, clearly reassessing the situation. Cutter monitored their communications, translating fragments of their language as best it could. They are debating whether this vessel poses a genuine threat, Cutter reported. Their original assessment indicated an unprotected NON functional salvage target. Current readings contradict that assessment. Keep everything running, Sarah ordered, watching the tense standoff unfold on the main screen. Don't let them see any weakness. For nearly an hour, the 2 sides simply watched each other across the empty space between them, neither side making the first move. Then, slowly, the 3 scavenger ships began to retreat, turning away from Earth and heading back toward deep space. A cheer erupted through the control room, quickly hushed by Sarah, who kept her eyes locked on the screen until the ships were confirmed to be leaving the system entirely. They're gone, James finally said, relief flooding through his voice. Cutter's mechanical voice broke the celebration with a note of caution. Assessment: scavengers avoided conflict due to uncertain risk, not due to genuine inferiority on their part. This outcome was achieved through deception, not actual military strength. We know, Sarah said, allowing herself a small, tired smile, but it worked. There is a high probability that news of this encounter will spread, Cutter continued. Scavenger networks communicate across wide distances. Other species may learn of this system's existence, and of this vessel's recovery. Sarah's smile faded slightly as she absorbed the warning. James looked around the control room, at the exhausted but hopeful faces of the humans who had just successfully bluffed their way past a genuine alien threat, using nothing but clever engineering and pure nerve. Then we'd better make sure, Sarah said quietly, that next time, it isn't a bluff. Far away, aboard the retreating scavenger vessels, a brief report was quietly transmitted into the wider galactic network, a small note buried among thousands of other reports, flowing between star systems every single day. It mentioned an unregistered system, a supposedly obsolete warship showing unexpected activity, and a species called humans that had, against all expectations, refused to be easy prey. It was a small report, barely noticed by most who received it, but not by everyone. The small report about Earth spread further than anyone on the planet realized. It passed from scavenger networks into trade routes, then into the hands of information brokers who sold interesting rumors to anyone willing to pay. Eventually, it reached someone who understood exactly what it meant. Her name was Threl Ka, a mid-ranking commander within the Dravith hegemony, a militant species known throughout the Concord for their aggressive expansion and their hunger for resources. The Dravith were not scavengers looking for easy salvage. They were conquerors, always searching for weak, unregistered systems to claim before the Concord could officially protect them. Threl Ka read the report twice. An unregistered system, a supposedly obsolete warship, disposed of legally by the Vrenthil, now showing signs of unexpected repair and activity. A species called humans, primitive by every measure, yet somehow clever enough to scare off a scavenger fleet without firing a single shot. Interesting, she murmured to herself, standing on the bridge of her flagship, the Ash Crown. A genuine warship far more advanced and dangerous than the thresh cutter had ever been, even at its best. She brought the report to her superiors, arguing for a small expedition. If humans truly were repairing an old Kalan-era warship without proper authorization, that alone was a violation worth investigating. And if the system truly was unregistered and unprotected, it represented an opportunity. A primitive species, sitting on valuable territory, with just enough stolen technology to be dangerous, but not nearly enough experience to use it properly. Her superiors agreed. Within weeks, a Dravith fleet, 5 warships strong, set course for Earth's solar system. Back on Earth, more than a year had passed since the scavenger encounter. The thresh cutter's restoration had progressed remarkably, though it was still far from complete. Weapon systems were now operating at nearly 70% capacity. The hull, reinforced with newly mined and processed materials, was stronger than it had been in decades. Most importantly, the ship's propulsion systems, the most complex and difficult part of the entire restoration, had finally been brought back online, allowing the thresh cutter to move under its own power for the first time in years. Sarah Chen stood in the ship's control room, now much larger and more advanced than the small team that had first activated Cutter. Hundreds of engineers and officers worked at stations throughout the ship, monitoring systems, running diagnostics, and training for scenarios nobody had ever truly prepared for. James Okafor, now the ship's chief engineer in all but official title, walked in carrying a data tablet filled with the latest performance reports. "Propulsion is stable," he reported. "We could actually fly this thing now, if we needed to." "Let's hope we don't need to," Sarah replied, though the tension in her voice suggested she didn't fully believe her own words. Cutter's voice came through the room's speakers, calmer and more familiar after years of working alongside its human crew. "Sarah Chen, long-range sensors have detected 5 vessels entering this system. Trajectory indicates direct approach toward Earth." The room fell silent. 5 ships, General Webb repeated, arriving just in time to hear the announcement. "Scavengers again?" "Negative," Cutter replied. "Vessel configuration matches. Dravith hegemony military design. These are not salvage vessels. These are warships." The tension in the room turned instantly to fear. Sarah exchanged a grim look with James and Webb. "How do they compare to us?" Sarah asked. Cutter's answer came without hesitation. "Each vessel is estimated to be significantly more advanced than this ship, even at current restoration levels. 5 such vessels represent a force this ship alone cannot defeat in direct combat." Nobody spoke for a long moment. Years of hard work, of sacrifice, of impossible engineering challenges overcome through sheer stubborn human effort. And now, finally, the true test had arrived. Not scavengers looking for easy salvage, but soldiers looking for conquest. "Get every world leader on a call," Sarah finally said. "Now." Within hours, the leaders of every major nation on Earth were connected through an emergency communication network, watching the same sensor feed showing 5 alien warships steadily approaching their world. Fear spread quickly through the call, voices rising over each other, demanding answers nobody could fully provide. Sarah Chen, standing before the largest gathering of world power in human history, took a deep breath before speaking. "We knew this day might come," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "We've spent years preparing the thresh cutter, training our defense forces, building everything we could to protect our planet. That preparation is not finished, but it's not nothing, either." "Can we win?" asked the President of the United States, her voice tight with barely controlled fear. Sarah hesitated before answering honestly. "Cutter's assessment says no, not in a direct fight." Silence spread across the call. "Then what do we do?" asked another leader. "Surrender? Evacuate?" "We fight smart," James Okafor said firmly, stepping into view beside Sarah. "We've done it before, against the scavengers. We use everything we have, every clever trick, every piece of unconventional thinking humans have ever used to survive impossible odds throughout our entire history." General Webb spoke next, his military bearing steady despite the enormity of the threat. "We've spent years training defense forces, building smaller support craft, preparing weapon platforms across the planet's surface and orbit. We are not defenseless. We are simply outmatched in raw power. That means we don't fight their way. We fight ours. Over the following 48 hours, as the Dravith fleet drew closer, humanity mobilized every resource it had. Military forces from every nation coordinated together, under Earth Defense Command, something that would have seemed impossible only a few years earlier. Smaller defense ships, built using a combination of human ingenuity and salvaged alien technology, were positioned strategically throughout the solar system. Ground-based weapon platforms, developed using technology reverse-engineered from the Thresh Cutter itself, prepared to defend the planet's surface if the battle came that far. Cutter worked alongside human strategists, analyzing every scrap of data about Dravith tactics and technology pulled from the ship's outdated, but still valuable historical records. Dravith military doctrine favors direct, overwhelming force. They rarely expect unconventional resistance from weaker species. This may be exploitable. James Okafor took that information and ran with it, working with engineering teams to design a series of traps and tactics specifically meant to catch the Dravith fleet off guard. Small, fast attack craft, difficult for the larger Dravith warships to target effectively, were prepared for hit-and-run strikes. Sensor decoys, similar to the ones used against the scavengers but far more sophisticated, were positioned to confuse enemy targeting systems. Most importantly, a bold plan began to take shape regarding the Thresh Cutter itself. If we can lure their fleet into a tight formation, James explained to Sarah and Webb during a tense final planning session, the Thresh Cutter. Choose remaining weapon systems, combined with coordinated strikes from our smaller ships, could hit multiple targets at once before they even realize what's happening. It's risky, Webb said, studying the tactical display. If it fails, we lose the ship, and probably a large portion of our defense fleet along with it. If we don't try something, Sarah replied quietly, we lose everything anyway. The plan was set. It would rely on timing, coordination, and a willingness to take enormous risks, qualities that humanity, across its long and difficult history, had never lacked. As the Dravith fleet entered Earth's outer solar system, Commander Threl Ka studied the sensor data pouring into her flagship's tactical displays. The old Kalan warship, according to her reports, was indeed active, its systems showing signs of significant, if incomplete, restoration. Around it, a scattering of smaller vessels, clearly primitive by Dravith standards, formed what could generously be called a defense fleet. She almost laughed at the sight. 5 Dravith warships, each superior in every measurable way, against one damaged relic and a handful of primitive human ships. This would not even qualify as a real battle. It would be a demonstration, a lesson to remind a foolish young species of its true place in the galaxy. Proceed toward the planet, she ordered. Standard formation. Let them see what true military strength looks like. Her ships moved forward confidently, arranging themselves in a tight, disciplined formation as they approached Earth, exactly as Dravith doctrine demanded, exactly as Cutter had predicted they would. Aboard the Thresh Cutter, Sarah Chen watched the enemy formation solidify on the tactical display, her heart pounding. They're doing it, she said quietly. They're forming up exactly like Cutter said they would. James Okafor, seated at the engineering station, allowed himself a small, grim smile. Then let's give them a lesson of our own. Across the solar system, thousands of humans, soldiers and engineers and scientists alike, held their breath as the largest battle in human history prepared to begin. Behind them stood every ounce of stubborn determination, clever engineering, and refusal to accept defeat that had defined humanity throughout its entire difficult, remarkable history. Ahead of them stood a galaxy that had thrown away an old warship without a second thought, never imagining that the small, unprotected world it landed on would dare to fight back. The Dravith fleet was about to learn exactly how large a mistake that had been. The Dravith fleet crossed into Earth's inner solar system in tight, confident formation, 5 warships moving together like a single, unstoppable fist. Commander Threl Ka watched her tactical display with mild boredom, expecting nothing more than a brief show of resistance before the primitive humans surrendered, or were simply overwhelmed. Aboard the Thresh Cutter, the mood was very different. Every station was fully manned. Sarah Chen stood at the command platform, James Okafor at the engineering station beside her. General Webb coordinating with fleet commanders across dozens of smaller human vessels spread throughout the system. Cutter's calm, mechanical voice fed a steady stream of tactical data into every connected system. Enemy fleet maintaining tight formation as predicted, Cutter reported. Distance to optimal engagement range, 3 minutes. All ships, hold positions, Webb ordered over the fleet-wide channel. Wait for the signal. Nobody moves early. The plan was simple in concept, though difficult in execution. Human decoy satellites, scattered strategically throughout the system, would activate at the right moment, creating confusing sensor readings that would scatter the Dravith formation just enough to create gaps. Small, fast human attack craft, hidden among asteroid debris and behind larger structures, would strike those gaps hard and fast, then retreat before the powerful Dravith ships could properly target them. Meanwhile, Cutter, using its restored weapon systems, would focus fire on the Dravith flagship itself, aiming to disable their command and communication before the rest of the fleet could adapt. It was a plan built entirely around one simple truth Cutter had identified weeks earlier. The Dravith were used to fighting weaker, disorganized opponents, who fell into predictable patterns of panic and retreat. They were not prepared for coordinated, unconventional resistance from a species with nothing left to lose. 2 minutes, Cutter announced. Sarah felt her hands tighten into fists at her sides. Beside her, James stared intently at his engineering display, watching power levels across the ship's weapon systems climb steadily toward maximum output. 1 minute. Across the system, thousands of human pilots and soldiers sat in tense silence, waiting for the order that would begin the most important battle their species had ever fought. Now, Webb said quietly, execute. The decoy satellites activated in perfect unison, flooding Dravith sensors with confusing energy readings, false ship signatures, and jammed communication frequencies. For a brief, critical moment, the disciplined Dravith formation wavered, ships adjusting course to account for threats that did not actually exist, creating exactly the gaps human strategists had hoped for. Small human attack craft, faster and more maneuverable than anything the Dravith expected from a primitive species, shot out from hidden positions among nearby asteroids and orbital debris. They struck fast, targeting weak points in the Dravith ship's shields identified through weeks of careful analysis of scavenger fleet data, then retreated immediately, refusing to stay and fight a battle they could not win directly. Commander Threl Ka's confident expression turned to confusion, then anger, as reports of damage and disrupted systems flooded her bridge. Report, she snapped. What is happening? Multiple small craft, Commander. They struck our shield generators and retreated before we could target them. Reform the formation immediately. Focus fire on that old warship. It must be coordinating this attack. But reforming a tight formation while under constant harassment from small, fast-moving attackers proved far more difficult than Threl Ka anticipated. Every time her ships attempted to regroup, another wave of human attack craft struck from a different angle, forcing individual ships to break formation again to defend themselves. Aboard the Cutter, Sarah watched the chaos unfold on the tactical display with a mixture of fierce pride and gut-wrenching fear. It's working, she breathed. James, we need full power to the main weapon systems, now. Charging now, James replied, his fingers flying across his console. Cutter, target their flagship's communication array, just like we planned. Targeting solution locked, Cutter confirmed. Firing. The Cutter. Main weapon, restored after years of painstaking work, fired for the first time in decades. A brilliant beam of concentrated energy tore through space, striking the Dravith flagship's communication array with devastating precision. Sparks and debris exploded outward from the impact point, and for a brief moment, the ash crown and's outer hull lights flickered wildly before stabilizing. Inside the ash crown, alarms blared across Threl Ka's bridge. Communication systems damaged, Commander. We can't coordinate with the rest of the fleet. Threl Ka's confidence cracked for the first time since entering the system. This was not supposed to happen. Primitive species did not fight with such coordination, such precision, such willingness to take enormous risks for small, calculated advantages. She had expected panic and disorder. Instead, she found herself facing an enemy that fought like a wounded animal, cornered in its own den, desperate and dangerous. All ships, independent engagement protocols, she ordered, her voice tight with frustration. Destroy that warship and clear the small craft. Do not let their coordination continue. The battle raged on for nearly 2 hours, an eternity for everyone involved. The Thresh Cutter took heavy damage, its hull scarred by return fire from the Draveth ships, its weapon systems straining under the load of sustained combat far beyond what its restored systems were truly designed to handle. Several human attack craft were lost, their pilots giving everything they had to protect their homeworld. But slowly, steadily, the coordinated human strategy began to turn the tide. Without proper communication between their ships, the Draveth fleet struggled to maintain the disciplined tactics they relied upon. Isolated and confused, each Draveth warship found itself facing constant harassment from small, fast human craft, while the Thresh Cutter weapons continued targeting critical systems whenever an opportunity presented itself. James Okafor worked frantically at his station, rerouting power between systems as damage mounted, keeping the ship functional through sheer engineering skill and desperate improvisation. We're losing shield strength on the port side, he called out. Cutter, can we compensate? Rerouting auxiliary power, Cutter replied. Shield strength partially restored. Warning, this solution is temporary. Temporary is fine, Sarah said grimly. We just need to hold long enough. The turning point came when one of the Draveth warships, isolated from the rest of its fleet and battered by repeated small craft strikes, suffered a critical systems failure and drifted out of the battle entirely, its crew scrambling for emergency repairs. Seeing the opportunity, Webb coordinated a concentrated strike from 3 separate human attack squadrons against a second Draveth vessel, overwhelming its weakened shields and forcing it to retreat as well. Aboard the Ashcrown, Threlka watched in disbelief as 2 of her 5 warships were forced out of the fight by a fleet she had expected to destroy within minutes. Damage reports continued flooding in from her remaining ships, each one describing the same pattern: constant, unpredictable harassment, combined with precise, punishing strikes from the old warship whenever her fleet's formation weakened even slightly. This was not the easy conquest she had promised her superiors. This was a real fight, against an enemy that refused to follow any of the patterns she had expected from a primitive, unregistered species. Commander, her tactical officer said quietly, at this rate, continued engagement risks losing additional vessels. Recommend tactical withdrawal. Threlka stared at the display for a long, silent moment, pride warring with practical military judgment. Finally, she made her decision. All remaining ships, withdraw, she ordered, her voice tight with barely controlled frustration. We will return with a larger force, properly prepared for this species' tactics. The remaining Draveth ships retreated from the system, leaving behind a battered, exhausted, but victorious human fleet. Cheers erupted throughout the Thresh Cutter's control room as confirmation came through that the enemy fleet was truly leaving, not simply repositioning for another attack. Sarah Chen allowed herself a moment of relief, tears mixing with exhaustion as she watched the enemy signatures fade from the tactical display. James Okafor sank back into his chair, utterly drained, a tired smile spreading across his face despite the damage reports still scrolling across his screen. We did it, he said quietly. We actually did it. Casualty reports indicate significant human losses, Cutter reported, its tone carrying something that almost sounded like genuine concern. However, this vessel, and the majority of supporting fleet, survived the engagement. This outcome exceeds all initial tactical projections. Sarah nodded slowly, the weight of victory mixing with the heavy cost of the battle. Many pilots, soldiers, and engineers had given everything to protect their world, and that sacrifice would never be forgotten. But Earth had survived. More than survived. It had fought off a genuine military power, forcing them into retreat through nothing but clever strategy, stubborn determination, and the courage to fight against impossible odds. News of the battle spread quickly throughout the galaxy, carried along the same information networks that had once brought word of Earth's stubborn resistance against scavengers. This time, the story was far more significant. A primitive, unregistered species had successfully defended their homeworld against a genuine Draveth military fleet. using nothing but a single restored obsolete warship and homemade defense craft. The story reached the Galactic Concord's attention within weeks, prompting quiet, cautious discussions among various species about this strange new world called Earth. Some argued the humans should be immediately registered and brought under Concord protection, if only to prevent further conflicts in the region. Others argued for caution, wary of a species that had shown such unexpected resilience and cleverness against superior technology. Aboard the Thresh Cutter, now proudly repainted with a new name chosen by its human crew, the Second Chance. Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck, looking out at the stars that had once seemed so distant and irrelevant to humanity's daily struggles. That had changed forever now. Earth was no longer isolated, no longer unaware of the vast, complicated galaxy surrounding it. James Okafor joined her, looking equally thoughtful. "They'll come back, you know," he said quietly. "The Draveth, or someone else. This isn't over." "I know," Sarah replied, a small, determined smile crossing her face. "But next time, we won't just be defending an old, broken warship. We'll be defending everything we've built since then, and we'll be ready." Cutter's voice broke the quiet moment, calm and steady as always. Analysis confirms. Human adaptability, determination, and unconventional strategic thinking represent significant military advantages, despite technological limitations. Recommendation: continue current development trajectory. Sarah laughed softly, the sound carrying real warmth despite the exhaustion in her voice. "Thanks, Cutter. We'll take that as a compliment." Far away, across countless star systems, word continued to spread about the small blue planet that refused to be ignored, the primitive species that had turned unwanted galactic garbage into a symbol of defiance, and the beginning of a new, unpredictable chapter in the history of the entire galaxy. Humanity had been dumped, forgotten, and underestimated, and in return, humanity had made an entire galaxy start paying very, very close attention. The story of Earth was only just beginning.